Angelic genetics, why the Nephilim were physical giants. Have you ever wondered why the Nephilim were so big? The answer might seem obvious, but there could be more than meets the eye. Introduction. The topics of fallen angels and their Nephilim offspring are strange ones indeed. Most researchers in this field know the basic story. Long ago, rebellious angels came down to earth to procreate with human women. The result of this act was the creation of giant angel-human hybrids. We learn the details of this from Genesis 6, 1 through 4, the Book of Enoch, and various other ancient sources. However, one area that is often accepted yet not commonly explored is why the Nephilim hybrids were so physically gigantic. Angelic gigantism? On the surface, the answer would seem obvious. They are part angel. Of course they would be giants. But what is it exactly that leads us to this conclusion? If we are to assume the Nephilim were giant in physical size because of their angelic progenitors, we would equally have to make the logical assumption that angels are giant in physical size as well. Consider these passages from the Bible concerning angels. Genesis 18, 1 through 2, And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground. Genesis 19, verses 1 and 5, And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. Hebrews 13:2, Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Genesis chapters 18 and 19 both tell us the angels appeared as men to those who witnessed them. There is found no description of gargantuan size. Hebrews 13:2 even tells us that angels physically appear so human that some have entertained them without knowing they were angels. An interesting side note to this, there is no distinction made between heavenly and fallen angels here. It only states angels in a general sense. It would seem both benevolent and malevolent angels appear human in appearance. Biblically speaking, a larger physical size does not seem to be an attribute attributed to angels. Why, then, were the hybrid offspring of fallen angels physically gigantic? One answer that could be offered to this question would have something to do with Jude. In the book of Jude, we learn that the rebellious angels seemed to have lost something once they fell. Jude 1:6, And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. An interpretation could be made that states the first estate or the habitation is referring to the angelic body. There is certainly good reason for this view, and in part I definitely agree with that assessment. For more information on this, refer to my blog post, The Secrets of the Nephilim, Who Are They, What Are They Doing, and Why?, which can be found at joshpeckdisclosure.blogspot.com, as well as my book Disclosure, Unveiling Our Role in the Secret War of the Ancients, which can be found at ministudyministry.com. However, this still brings up an important question. If the fallen angels truly traded in their extra-dimensional angelic body for a completely 3-dimensionally physical one, would that not apply to genetics as well? In other words, if there was nothing angelic about the body anymore, why would that only stop at outward appearance? Would not the cellular makeup, genetics, and DNA be non-angelic as well? I do not believe it would be accurate to say the angels who fell traded their angelic bodies for human bodies. I do believe the text states a type of downgrade occurred, especially when considering the meanings of the words used from the original language. However, I believe there was still one aspect of their angelic physiology they were able to retain: extra-dimensionality. Superphysicality and extra dimensions. As I show in my books Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, angels are true extra-dimensional beings. This applies to heavenly and fallen angels. Instead of thinking of angels as ethereal, wispy entities that are made from essentially nothing, as our culture dictates, it would be more accurate to think of angels as being superphysical. They possess more physicality than we do. The difference is they are able to exist in higher dimensions. This does not mean angels can travel to higher or extra dimensions. It means they naturally take up space in those higher dimensions. Just as we do not exactly travel to the second dimension or the first dimension because we are a part of those dimensions, angels are a part of higher spatial dimensions. This is obviously a very difficult thing to grasp, let alone envision. Thankfully, an author in the late 1800s provided us with an excellent thought exercise to help us consider these ideas. The book Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by A. Abbott explores the idea of a fictional two-dimensional universe called Flatland. The inhabitants of Flatland are known as Flatlanders and are described as simple shapes, such as squares, circles, and triangles. The story explores the question of how a being of three spatial dimensions would describe himself or interact with a Flatlander and be properly understood. A Flatlander would have no concept of up or down. To a Flatlander, all that exists is forward, backward, left, and right. Because of this, height and depth are completely foreign concepts that Flatlanders would not be able to perceive or even envision in their minds. Even if a three-dimensional object were to breach their two-dimensional space, Flatlanders would only see it in their two-dimensional perspective. If I were to drop a ball through Flatland, the Flatlanders witnessing this event would not see the ball as we do. They would see a point in space appear in front of them just as the ball breaches their space. Next, as the ball passes through, Flatlanders would see a circle growing in size in front of them. The circle would reach its largest when the middle of the ball passes through. After that, as the ball is exiting, Flatlanders would see the circle shrink in size and eventually disappear completely. Technically, the Flatlanders did see the entire ball, but they only saw it in numerous two-dimensional slices. We can apply this to our three-dimensional experience as a thought exercise to help us imagine extra-spatial dimensions. And to be clear, we're only speaking of spatial dimensions here, not temporal. Time, as the fourth dimension, is not a factor in this exercise. What if a ball consisting of 4 spatial dimensions rather than 3, called a hypersphere, were to breach our 3 dimensions of space? For us, it would be the same thing, just with an added dimension. We would first see a point in space appear. As the hypersphere moves through our space, the point would become a ball and continue growing in size. Once the middle of the hypersphere is through our space, we would see the ball start to shrink in size until it disappears completely. As a quick side note, isn't it interesting that many reports of UFOs contain details such as these? For more information on that aspect, refer to my books Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, available at ministudyministry.com. Intruders from higher dimensions. We can use this to help us consider the extra dimensionality of angels. An angel can breach our space and even look perfectly human, but that does not mean that's all there is to the angel. We would not be able to see what is hidden in the higher dimensions. Consider again the hypersphere. If the hypersphere were to stop midway through our dimensions of space, it would appear as a normal ball to us. If it were small enough, we would be able to touch it, pick it up, throw it around, even fully enclose it in a container. However, there is one catch to this. If the ball was really a hypersphere, it should be heavier than we would originally deduce. Back to Flatland. Imagine Flatland is vertical instead of horizontal. Imagine Flatland consists of left, right, up, and down, but not forward and backward. In short, imagine Flatland as a wall instead of the floor. This would mean Flatland would be subject to gravity. Even if Flatlanders were the same size as us by way of height and width, they would still weigh a considerable amount less than we do because there simply would be less to their physical makeup. If a human were to step halfway through Flatland, he could look like a normal Flatlander to any other Flatlander. If Flatlanders were to try and weigh the human or pick him up, however, they would quickly realize something was different. They would discover he weighs a lot more than they do. The difference is the rest of his physical body is hidden in the third spatial dimension. Looking at this from the other end, it would also mean the human would be incredibly stronger and more powerful than any Flatlander. Lifting a Flatlander would be no problem at all to a human. Even if the Flatlanders were to become frightened and try attacking the human could win the battle easily by sheer strength and utilizing the extra third dimension. The human could step into the third dimension and take the Flatlanders out one by one with ease. The Flatlanders would have no defense. Scaling this up to our 3 dimensions and considering extra spatial dimensions, this might help explain some of the amazing strength and abilities angels possess in the Bible. 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, from the New Living Translation, states, "That night the angel of the Lord went out to the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. When the surviving Assyrians woke up the next morning, they found corpses everywhere." Extra-dimensional genetics. Laying aside the exact mechanics of how such a thing could actually happen, remember this is just a thought exercise, imagine the human were to impregnate a Flatlander female. Most of the fertilization process happens on the Flatlander side, so for it to even be possible, the 3-dimensional human seed would have to somehow adapt. If conception occurred, it would be within a 2-dimensional environment. The genetics from the male would still be passed to the offspring, but the new body that is forming within the Flatlander would be 2-dimensional. The Flatlander would be 2-dimensional herself and would not be capable of housing, creating, or even contributing to something 3-dimensional. Therefore, the 3-dimensional end of the spectrum would have to adapt to the new 2-dimensional environment. This raises the issue, however, that there are still 3-dimensional traits being passed down to a 2-dimensional child. Most of these, such as skin, hair, and eye color, wouldn't pose any problems. However, the genes that determine size certainly would. The genes determining 3-dimensional size would be present in this new 2-dimensional hybrid. Simply speaking, all of that mass and size has to go somewhere. With no other choice, the size of the hybrid grows in the 2 dimensions it can actually inhabit, yet since there is so much of it, the hybrid would grow to an incredible height and width. Once born, this 2-dimensional human Flatlander hybrid would quickly be recognized as a giant among other Flatlanders. This is all speculative, of course, but if we use that thought exercise for 3 spatial dimensions, it might help explain why the Nephilim were of such great giant size. The extra-dimensional genetics of an angel would be passed to the hybrid child. The genes that determine size would be present as well, but would have to conform to only 3 dimensions rather than 4 or more. Since there is at least 1 less spatial dimension it can grow in, the hybrid child would grow far more in the 3 dimensions it can actually inhabit. If there is any validity to the 14th century text, this might also help explain this horrific passage that describes the birthing process. From the Kebra Nagast, chapter 100, with whom the angels have conceived, but they were unable to bring forth their children, and they died. And of the children who were in their wombs, some died, and some came forth. Having split open the bellies of their mothers, they came forth by their navels. And when they were grown up and reached man's estate, they became giants, whose height reached unto the clouds. Motivations of extra-dimensional aliens. This might also explain why so many alien abduction accounts include details about the entities being interested in our genetics. To be clear up front, I am of the belief that alien beings are actually extra-dimensional by nature rather than extraterrestrial. I do believe they have the ability to create three-dimensional living bodies. However, I believe the overall origin of these things are not from another planet, but rather from a higher dimension. For more on this, refer to Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots. It seems with direct copulation between an angel and human, the problem of gigantism is unavoidable. It would also seem angelic genes could carry traits not normally found in humans. These traits could be any number of superhuman abilities. Looking into the ancient demigods could give us an idea of what some of those traits might be. Perhaps the alien entities are still trying to hybridize themselves with humans. Perhaps they are trying to suppress problematic genes such as giantism, while bringing out more favorable genes such as those of telepathy, telekinesis, and even possibly natural interdimensional travel. This may all culminate in the extra-dimensional beings perfecting their original plan from the past and unleashing it on our unsuspecting, unbelieving modern world. Conclusion. As stated earlier, this is all speculative. If I am being honest, I would have to admit it is highly speculative. However, if true, it could add some legitimacy from a scientific perspective, even if only theoretical, to the strange ancient accounts of angels procreating with human women. At the very least, it can provide a point of interest for others to research on their own. It is good for us to look into these things ourselves to see what truly adds up. After all, we may very well have to contend with these things someday. When that day comes, even the craziest of theories will seem plausible. It's a good idea to get a head start on them now while we still can. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. And as always, take care and God bless.